Okay. So our first question is, can you tell us a little bit about how it was growing up in Worcester in the 1920s, 1930 time?
I was born in 1926. That's a long time ago, wasn't it? And I had 4 older brothers and an older sister. And I went to grammar school near Indian Lake, and I'd walk to school sometimes, and then walk home for lunch, walk back to school for lunch, and then come. That was about a mile each way. So that's grammar school. Then I went to a local high school. Continue?
Yeah, you can keep talking.
Want the name? So North High School, and I had my 4 older brothers had set a precedent. They were sort of undisciplined, I would say. But anyways, they were good. They were football players and ice hockey players, and 2 of my brothers rode on a crew. They had a crew for North High School, the only public school that had an 8-man crew. So when it came time, I ended up rowing on the high school crew, which was a lot of fun.
Was there anything else, like any other activities that you participated in?
Anything else of what?
Like activities or sports that you did other than crew?
Well, it was available. What about the crew you had?
Was there any other activities? Like, did you do any sports or any clubs when you were in high school?
Oh no, I didn't. I didn't play organized sport in high school other than the crew. I didn't play football. My older brothers had played football and ice hockey at North High School, and they were good, but I didn't follow along in that.
All right, so were there any influences from your childhood that kind of inspired you to join the military?
Well, I was in. The war broke out in 1941. Is that what you're talking about? Well, I was a senior in high school, and my 4 older brothers had already been in the military. My oldest brother had gone to ROTC at Norwich University in Vermont, and so he got a commission. And my next oldest brother was Arthur, and he went to ROTC at University of Mass in Amherst. So they both got commissions in the Army Air Corps, they called it at the time. And they served in, my brother Art flew the hump, which was they carried supplies from India over the Himalaya Mountains to China, to Chiang Kai-shek. So they were busy 4 years doing that. I had another brother, the 2 other brothers went into the Air Corps. My brother John was a waist gunner, machine gunner on a B-17 flying missions over Europe. And Charlie was in the Pacific. They were scattered all over the world. So I graduated from high school in June of '44. I was admitted to Harvard College, and within a month, we graduated in June or May 1944, and right away I went to Harvard and started my college career then, courses. I joined the crew at Harvard, and I was on the junior varsity crew, and which I really enjoyed. And so we had ROTC cadets. These were military cadets from the Navy that were in they had the 2 programs, the V5 and the V12, and so I rode with them. But in July of 1944, I turned 18, and I got notice I was going to be drafted. So in November of '44, I got drafted, sent to Florida for infantry training down in Florida. That was in October of '44. And that was sort of tough training down there as infantry. I was trained in heavy machine guns and mortars, and I finished there in December, and in January I was shipped to Boston, and I was put on a troop ship along with other infantry troops, and we left Boston and we sailed across the Atlantic. It was a rough crossing, and I have to mention a lot of the guys were below deck and they got sick because of the stormy weather. So I used to stay on deck most of the time, just watching the weather and watching out for U-boats, which those were pretty much gone there at that time.
What are those? U-boats?
U-boats are German submarines, and they call them U-boats because the German word for a submarine is Unterseeboot. So that's where they got U-boat. It's Unterseeboot, under the ocean boat. That's good description, huh?
Yeah. So you said you were drafted. How did you feel when you first got drafted? Like, were you excited or nervous, or?
When I first got back where?
When you first got drafted into the war.
When you were first drafted, how did you feel?
Well, that was your duty to your country. Everybody was, you owed it to your country to protect your country. And my father had been in World War I, and he was infantry over in France. He got wounded and he was gassed, and he stayed in the military. He liked the military, so it's sort of natural in our family. Yeah.
Also, you might mention that this was towards the end of the war, and you had 4 brothers already in the war.
I already mentioned them.
Oh, I see.
You have to follow the script, Mrs. White.
Excuse me for interrupting.
Okay, so anyways, I got to Le Havre, France. They put us on troop trains, and they took us to a replacement depot for troops. And I was assigned to an infantry division that was in southern Germany, the 71st Infantry Division. And I joined them as a rifleman. And we did, the war was still on. That was in January of 45. So the war ended in May of 45, but so I was down in southern Germany, and I was a rifleman with the division, and we were taking a lot of prisoners, and my sergeant found out I could speak a little German because I had taken German as a language in college, but it came to me very easily. I don't know why, except that my mother's parents' family came from Germany, and so she had spoken some German. But anyways, the sergeant would say to me, "Hey, White, you speak German, come talk to these guys." And they were mostly older men and young guys that they knew the war was winding down. But when he said talk to them, I'd say, "Raus mit den Händen hoch," come out with your hands high. And they'd come out. These are older guys and young fellows of my age, and even younger. And they'd say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah." And I'd say, "Zurückgehen," go to the rear. We wouldn't even put a guard on them. They just walked back because they knew the Russians were not far away. So
they preferred to be taken by the Americans. They preferred to be prisoners of the Americans.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Americans or the British, not so much the French. The French were not, there were bad feelings there between some of the French, but there was only a few French outfits anyway, mostly American and British. But anyways, the war ended in May of 1945, and so they started shipping all the equipment, tanks and all these other military equipment. That was headed for Japan. And so that was in May of 1945. And I was set to go to Japan. We knew that short time as guys who hadn't had that much time in combat in Germany knew that eventually you'd go to Japan for the invasion of Japan. So in September 2nd, 1945, I was on a deuce and a half truck and with some other guys who had just a few months.
What's a deuce and a half truck?
And the sergeant came out, and we knew we were going to Marseille. From there, we'd go to the Suez Canal, and then go to Japan for the invasion of Japan. So, but the sergeant came out and he says, "All right, you guys, off the truck." We get off the truck, and that was VJ Day, September 2nd, 1945.
So both European and Japanese wars.
Well, the war ended in May in Europe.
May in Europe.
1945. And the Japanese surrendered on September 2nd, 1945. So we get off the trucks, and for subsequent year, I was part of the Army of Occupation. So I took advantage of my time there. I found out, as a matter of fact, they were looking for to form a crew for some American soldiers to row with a German crew. And I was transferred to headquarters USFET, which was in Frankfurt, Germany, and I was going to row with a German crew to build up good relations. I never got on the 8-man crew, but I found a single shell, and I had rowed in a single shell at Harvard, and so I used to go down there and give Herb Pfeiffer some cigarettes, tobacco, and he let me row. So it was interesting.
A single shell, is that a type of boat?
A single shell is instead of 8 men, it's a very lightweight boat. It's a shell. They call it a shell. It's very lightweight and long, and you have 2 oars.
Okay.
And you have to be careful. If you're not careful, you can tip over very easily. A lot of novices have tipped over. But anyways, I spent time there.
He went to school there.
At one time, I was on guard duty at an ammunition depot. This was after the war, and a Fräulein came riding up on a bicycle, and they had signs up there, Eintritt streng verboten, which means entrance strictly forbidden. So she proceeded to go through this barrier, and this is where I got a chance to use my German again. I had my rifle, and I held up my rifle, and I said, "Halt, Fräulein, können Sie das schnell lesen? Can't you read?" And she was so embarrassed, she just turned around and took off to think that I spoke her language.
Oh my goodness.
Did you go to school there, Mr. White? And
at one point they had some college courses available down in southern France. They set up a college level courses in Biarritz, France, which was right next to the Spanish border. And I spent 3 months there taking courses, college courses. And I got a chance the border to Spain was closed. I went over there, and the Spanish police said I shouldn't come across there, so I left. But I was always trying out things. So I finished the courses.
which put you back, when you came back and returned to college, you were back in your class again.
Okay, I came back to the U.S., and that was in August of 1945. I returned to the U.S. and I started college, resumed college at Harvard, my courses. And
46.
Yeah, 46.
46.
Yeah. So the Army had given me a direct commission based on my military experience and education. So that was, I went back, finished college, but then I went to work for a bank in Boston, and then I got notice that because I was a new second lieutenant, they recalled me for active duty. So they said I'd never served any time. I said, yeah, I served 2 years, but not as an officer, so I got recalled for Korea. That was in January 1951. So in February 1952, I was sent to Korea, and I was assigned to a 40th Infantry Division in Korea, and opposite Chinese forces. And that was in the Kumsong Valley. That was the western part of Korea, near the west coast. And I was now a platoon leader, so I was responsible for 40 other guys, sometimes 50 other guys. And everything went on at night, which I didn't mind. And at one point, we were sent back in reserve to get some replacements because we had a turnover there. So we were back there and we were in training, and we got some South Korean soldiers came into our unit. In October 1952, we were sent to Heartbreak Ridge to relieve the 25th Division, which was up there, and they had taken some heavy losses from North Korean soldiers, and everything went on at nighttime in Korea, so you had to get used to sleeping a little bit during the daytime, and all your fighting went on at night, which I didn't mind. You get adjusted to it. So we were very busy fighting a lot of patrols. There was a lot of constant artillery fire and mortar fire on our position. So anyways, on November 3rd, my battalion got hit by North Korean attack, and that was the night of 3 and 4 November 1952. And I got wounded that night, and I got evacuated to a hospital, a military hospital in Japan.
What were the hospitals like during the war?
What about the hospital?
Like, what were they like? Like, how was it there?
How was it at the hospital? You get the best treatment you can get. The doctors and the nurses provided excellent care, super care.
They were all military, weren't they?
Yeah, they were all military. Yeah, military doctors and nurses.
And where was that? Where was the hospital?
Oh, that was on the southern island of Japan, southern island of Kyushu. So anyways, in December, the doctor said I was fit to return to duty, that my leg wounds and feet wounds were healed enough, so they sent me back to Korea, and I got back to my unit on Heartbreak Ridge on Christmas Eve, 1952.
What is Heartbreak Ridge? Well, what is Heartbreak Ridge?
That's a very mountainous country in the center of of Korea. Actually, it's in North Korea, and the truce line right now follows the positions where they had a truce, and those it's up in North Korea actually. Our soldiers took over positions there, and they agreed not to fight, and so they were looking forward to some sort of peace, but it's very difficult to deal with North Koreans.
Did you happen to see just recently on television there was a defector from North Korea? He came across that line.
Oh, we had, every once in a while we'd get, everything went on, so in the mornings after being out on patrol or back in position, on the MLR. Sometimes you get what they call a line crosser, and they were hard to figure. Some of them were surrendering, others were informants and defectors. What we'd do is we'd make sure they were not armed, and then we'd send them to the rear for questioning by intelligence groups. That was not our job. So we lived. It was very cold in Heartbreak Ridge, and we lived in bunkers. And rations were. We ate a lot of C rations and K rations. Once in a while, they'd send up a hot meal in what they call Marmite cans. It's an insulated can, and it had 3 separate compartments: the meat, potato, and whatever else. So it was nice to get a hot meal once in a while.
What were the bunkers like that you lived in?
The bunkers were made of logs and stone and sandbags. Would you like to see a picture?
Sure. We can take the pictures at the end, and then we'll put them in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a picture of the soldiers, and it was very primitive living, I'd say, and cold.
So how did this differ from how you lived in World War II? Was there a difference in your living situation?
How do I compare the two?
Yeah.
Korean was very severe fighting, close fighting. They were, you might call them fanatical, but we took prisoners that night that I got wounded. We had taken 7 prisoners, so they weren't like any other guy. They were trying to stay alive, so they would surrender sometimes. So, but I always told the men in my platoon, I said, when we go out and patrol, we'd pull patrol, we'd go out through the main line of resistance, out through the bunkers and out into the no man's land. And I always told my guys, we go out together and we come back together. And that gave them confidence. So they were very loyal. If you took care of your men, they'd take care of you. So we continued to get North Korean attacks and artillery and mortar. They sent out a lot of artillery and mortar on our positions, but everything went on at night, and it was very cold and sort of dangerous at times, I'll put it. But anyways, in February 1953, I had enough points to go home, and I got sent down to Seoul, and we were put on a ship back to the U.S., and I got back to the United States in February, and that was in March of 53. So
how did you feel when you first started to go home? Like, was it such a relief to be able to leave the war? Did you feel like you were leaving something
How
behind?
did I feel?
Yeah.
Sort of relieved. I was used to it. Mostly I thought about the guys in my platoon. Because they were very loyal, and you sort of hate to break away, but everybody looked forward to getting enough points to go home, so that was it.
What were points? How did you earn points that you could get
You
home?
got, if you were online, you got 4 points. If you were back in a little further back in artillery positions, they got 3 points or 2 points. And when you were in reserve for training, you get 2 points. So when you were on the MLR, which was the main line of resistance, you get 4 points, and they earned it.
What was your fondest memory from the war? Your happiest memory from the war?
My happiest memory? I guess surviving. I think you get some wonderful guys fighting for their country, and you always got a few that will gripe, will complain more than others, but otherwise, I got a lot of experience, and when I first got to Japan, we went through a CBR course, chemical, biological, radiological course. So when I was there, I was always interested in language, so I started picking up some Japanese. It's a great language, so Chotomati Gamenasai is just a moment, if you please. And so it came in handy over there with some Korean prisoners, North Korean prisoners, and you speak Japanese to them and they listen. So it comes in handy. Languages are fun.
Yeah.
Even in a war situation.
Thinking back now, what was like the darkest or one of the hardest times during the war?
What was the hardest time?
Yeah. It can be out of either war that you served in.
You mean between Europe or Korea or?
In either or both.
Europe was good duty. That was they knew the Germans knew the war was winding down, and so the fighting elements they knew, and so the military knew that. So that's why they were surrendering, and some of them were still holding out. But war is hell, as they say, so it's better over with. But the odd thing is that here were the two former enemies in World War II, Japan and Germany. They're our closest allies right now. Go figure.
Yeah. But like, what were some of the hardest times during the Korean War? Was that more of a difficult war than World War II?
What was the hardest time in the Korean War?
Yeah.
Well, when I was younger, when I was in grammar school, as my brothers left, they were hunters, and I'd inherit their shotguns and .22 rifles, and I also took up trapping. I used to trap muskrats over in Indian Lake, which was a lake in our neighborhood, and you go out there. Used to go skating at night on Indian Lake. That was a great sport, and that's where I met my lovely wife, Eugenie.
Where?
And near Indian Lake, your family lived down there. So I never knew that I was going to end up married to Eugenie. But that was interesting. And then when I came back and I decided I need some more education, so I went to law school and under the GI Bill. And
what was the GI Bill?
GI is that's a veterans schooling. They were fortunate that the GI Bill gave you a chance to gave you so much tuition for monetary enumeration for your tuition to school, and it works much better. I feel sorry for these young students today that have to get student loans. That's terrible. They're gouging taking the high interest rates. What is it, 16% right now for student loans? It's outrageous.
They probably don't know yet.
But anyways, I finished law school, went into the general practice of law, found it's not the easiest way to make a living, but with the support of my lovely wife, we made it.
So, during the war, what did you do during your free time, if you had any?
What they do in the free time?
Yeah, like when you weren't fighting.
I went, when I was in Germany, I traveled as much as I could. On one occasion, they offered a trip to Denmark, and I thought, well, I'll sign up. So, war had ended, so I joined a group of guys and went to Copenhagen, Denmark. And it was nice to get fresh eggs and butter up there. They had a lot of food in Denmark. So I was invited to a home in an apartment house, and there was a couple there, and they had one daughter. I guess she was about 10 or 11 or so, and so they invited American soldiers. So I was invited, so I had a meal with them, and the phone rang, and the guy answered the phone, and I was very interested in learning languages, so he was on the phone, and he went, he continued like that, and I thought he was stuttering, but that's the way the Danes speak so fast, and a lot of people say that the Danish speaks the most difficult language they speak very fast, so before I knew it, he had hung up, and here I am trying to decipher the language. I love languages, and if you ever want a challenge, try and learn the Danish language. So that was one trip. Then on another trip, I got a chance to go to Rome, to the Vatican, so I signed up for that and went into the Vatican, and I even ended up seeing the Pope at that time.
What was that like to meet the Pope?
What was that?
What was that like to see the Pope?
Well, he's beautiful. Rome is a beautiful place, and the Vatican's a beautiful building. But the Pope was very nice, and I even kissed his ring.
At that time?
Yeah, and also the church, the main church, it's a huge dome. I'm sure you've seen pictures of the dome, but I climbed it. There's a stairway to go up to the top of the dome, and then there's a little ball or a metal sphere up there. So I figured to try anything. So I crawled up into this sphere, which is at the very top of the church, and just to say I'd been at the top of the world or the Vatican. I'd try anything.
Yeah.
Well, it was different in Korea. You didn't.
In Korea,
You didn't get a chance to do very much.
you wouldn't. The chaplains wouldn't come up to the MLR, to the bunkers there and all. If you were in reserve, there's a chaplain available, but otherwise you didn't. You were too busy doing your job and fighting, so you didn't have time for chaplains over there.
Yeah, so was it a really big adjustment coming from the war and having to go home, or was it just easy to transition back into your previous life?
To transition, well, you have to adapt. When you're in combat, you adapt to it, and it's all attitude. Make the best of what you have. So if you do that, if you complain all the time, you're not very happy, so there's no point in complaining. Make the best of what you're doing and just continue on. So that's a good advice for you young people that don't get discouraged, and don't turn to drugs. That's the worst thing you can do. That's crazy. So and then went to Switzerland, and on one trip, and Lac Lugano, which was a lake between Italy and Switzerland, and they served breakfast, and I was still only 18, that's for sure, and so they had these little breakfasts, and the butter was a curlicue, like a little curve, like they take a knife, sort of groove curve, and I thought, that's a funny way to serve butter. We used to pats of butter or something like that, but that was European. They did everything in style over there.
Looking back on the war, what do you think one of your proudest achievements has been?
I didn't get it again. What was?
When you reflect back on your time in the war, what do you think your most proudest achievement has been?
My proudest
achievement from the war.
Experience or what?
Yeah.
Yeah, experience.
Proudest experience? I felt as though I was doing something for my country. I was proud of my brothers. They worked very hard. Fortunately, my mother had a good sense of fortitude, and she sent off 5 sons in World War II, and 5 came back. So,
well, that would be a great achievement.
I give her a lot of credit for not complaining. She always always very cheerful person.
Do you have any regrets about your time in the military? Do you regret anything you did while you were in the military?
Do I regret anything that I did? Perhaps I regret not seeing more of the world, but as far as regretting, if you're talking about combat, when I was a youngster, I was a hunter. I used to hunt and small game, and that was good experience for me. If you hadn't, some people might frown on hunting animals, but hunting is, you can learn to survive by, I always thought that my hunting experience saved my life many times, because when I was out on patrol especially, you want to make sure you know where the enemy is before they see you. So whenever I went out on patrol at night, everything went on at night over in Korea, and I always, I'd move maybe 5 or 10 yards, I would stop, look and listen, and that kept me alive, I think.
Yeah.
Because one night in particular, the night I got wounded, I was out on patrol, and I was going out a mountain ridge, and I saw this figure that, with no helmet, no steel helmet like a GI, and I was about to ask him a question, but I had my M2 carbine. It's an automatic carbine, and so when I saw him, he moved, so I gave him a burst with my M2 carbine, and he made some more noises, so I gave him another burst.
What's a carbine?
That what?
What is a carbine?
Carbine's a small rifle, an automatic rifle that has magazines, a curved magazine on it. And they used to have the straight magazine with 15 rounds, but the curved one had 30 rounds. So some of the guys, some of the sergeants would tape 2 of these together so you could fire 30 rounds and then press the release, turn it around, and put up another 30 rounds. So some of the guys came up with taping 3 magazines together, so together they had 90 rounds of ammunition they could fire.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have enough ammunition.
Yeah. So if you had one final piece of advice for anyone looking to join the military, what do you think that would be?
First of all, treat it as a duty to your country. You're fortunate to live in this country where you have freedom of choice, and some people take it for granted, but without a military, no nation can continue on and survive if you don't have the military to protect your interests. So you're doing a great duty when you serve your country in the military, even though some people would disagree. But to me, it's important to serve your country and do it honorably, and that's you sort of things will take care of themselves as you move along.
Thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you for the interview.
Yes, thank you for
Thank
talking
you
with us. Thank you so much.
All right.